Welcome to the Biltmore Church Podcast. Our church exists to glorify God by making disciples of Jesus who reach up, reach in, and reach out. And this podcast is a resource that's hopefully going to help you do just that. We are so excited to be back today for another episode right here in the middle of our 5 Words to Change Your Family teaching series. We had an awesome Sunday last week talking about friends. Pastor Bruce preached from various Proverbs, and today we're going to have a great follow-up conversation, really revolving around what it means to make real biblical friendships, finding the friends you need, and maybe avoiding the ones that you don't. So I'm super excited to get into today's conversation. It's going to be myself, Christian. I'm on staff here with Michelle Myers, who's our discipleship coordinator, and of course, our lead pastor, Bruce Frank. So today, before we jump into our conversation, we're going to go back and read some of the selected Proverbs from last week's teaching text. Here we go.
Proverbs 13:20, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Proverbs 14:7, leave the presence of a fool, for there you do not meet words of knowledge. Proverbs 18:1, whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. Proverbs 18:24, a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Proverbs 22:24 and 25, make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare. Proverbs 23:6 and 7, do not eat the bread of a man who is stingy. Do not desire his delicacies, for he is like one who is inwardly calculating. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. Proverbs 24:1 and 2. Be not envious of evil men, nor desire to be with them, for their hearts devise violence, and their lips talk of trouble. Proverbs 25:17. Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he have his fill of you and hate you. Proverbs 27:6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another.
All right, Pastor, you shared an excellent quote to open up your message that I want to get to in just a second. But first, let me say, fantastic job preaching through several Proverbs with lots of themes, lots of ways to go. The feedback we've gotten so far has just been incredible of how much some of those passages and Proverbs drove home some ideas, and you did an excellent job stewarding that time. But you kind of, earlier in your message, I think you shared the quote, which most people have heard, the show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Wanted to ask really both of y'all, just to kind of kickstart our discussion, is how have your closest friendships shaped your future over the years?
Oh, well, I think when I was younger, you look for friends that make you feel comfortable. And now I think that I look for friends who make me feel uncomfortable, but uncomfortable in the right ways. And so, younger, I'm looking for friends that have similar interests. Now I'm looking for friends that have similar priorities. And so I think that that's more of an indicator for me of how long is this friendship going to last? How deep can this friendship go? Are our values the same? And are you willing to tell me something that might even hurt my feelings a little bit because it's what's best for me? And so I think that my closest friends are the ones who can make me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, and I mean, again, the same thing. And I'm, depending on who you are, I don't trust easy. And if you burn me, I won't trust you again. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it is what it is. And so the ones, especially as an adults, they have over and over and over again, as they kind of went from that outer circle to the inner circle to the inner circle. I mean, there's been many, many times where they're like, you know what, you had a chance to, to not be trustworthy, and you've proved it over and over and over again. And then, to Michelle's point, it's uncomfortable, but it's comfortable because they have your back and they want what's best for you. And I would say, I don't know if it's the same for ladies as it is for guys, but most of the guys, so every once in a while, if you have like a glaring blind spot, but a lot of times it's almost exhortational versus confrontational. I mean, exhortational most of the time. It depends. Again, I can be my own worst critic. And so a lot of times it's just somebody coming in and like the four guys at the corners, just reminding you, listen, take this to the Lord. This is not over. Kind of almost speaking faith into you, believing for you when you can't believe for yourself is what the Mark 2 passage, I think, brings out the most. But for sure, and it changes. And you can't make friendships happen. Not because friendship in this is like close, trusted confidant. So there's a lot that goes into that. Trust is non-negotiable, but you've also got other stuff. Some of it's chemistry. I think men bond around shared experiences. I think one of the good things is you can take shared experiences and baptize them with prayer and a little bit of, and it goes from the buddy to the brother. Especially if you're intercore, or if you're following Jesus, you all want the same thing, and so a lot of it's I think that's the Proverbs 17:17 about iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another, and so sometimes that happens in non-planned. It kind of goes back to parenting we've talked about before. People talk about, well, I spend quality time. The problem is you never know when quality time is going to arise.
That's right.
Because you can't force quality time. And so just like with kids, quantity time, you end up with some quality time. I think same thing with friends.
Yeah, it's true.
Now you don't get nearly the time. And there's boundaries with friendships. And if you're busy in certain stages of life, it's not like you got to spend a humongous amount of time. I mean, there's guys that I know that if I might not have seen them for months, and boom, 2 minutes, it's like didn't miss a beat.
Right.
Then those are rare. I mean, those are rare if you have friends that you trust, and I have some built in with three brothers. They're not my only ones, but they are. To have a brother and a blood brother and they're all believers, and we stay in contact. We do a Zoom it's actually switched to Sunday nights, but anyway.
That's awesome.
They're super formative.
That's every week, right?
Yeah, that's every week. Yeah, if somebody can't make it, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
But just somebody you can say whatever you want to, and there's history there. There's a lot of stuff that makes a good friendship.
Yeah. I remember early on in marriage, and I think this is Gary Chapman. I can't remember exactly where it came from, but he talked about how in general, he was using it for marriage. I think it applies for friendship. In general, men and women bond in different ways. Typically, women have an easier time bonding in what he would call face-to-face environments, and men tend to bond in side-by-side environments. And you just mentioned an example of that with sometimes that shared activity where I'm not necessarily looking you in the eyes the whole time we're not over dinner.
Right.
But if we're fishing together, it's a little bit more natural, and I think some of those things they seem simple, but they're powerful.
For sure. And not even to mention that the foundation for your marriage is friendship as well.
Right.
It's friendship with romance blended in there.
Yeah.
It's not founded on romance and then trying to catch friendship later on.
Right.
That's a great clarification. So you mentioned that biblical friendship, and spent a lot of time on this. I shouldn't say mentioned. A biblical friendship is different than worldly friendship because it is about what we can do together for God's glory. That seems to be the underlying difference, rather than just personal benefit. So how do we, in our friendships, we've built trust over time like you were talking about. How do we begin to practically make that transition into our current friendships where it becomes to be about God's glory, what we can do together?
Yeah, I mean, I would think, it doesn't have to be a 4-hour Bible study, okay? And it could be, I know a lot of our young staff guys have gotten the golf bug, so on Fridays they're playing golf, and so I can promise you, even in the course of that, that's quantity time, but that will lend itself to quality time, especially if there's a little bit of intentionality. Just a little bit of intentionality, like, hey, before you leave, besides just talking about what'd you bogey or what'd you double bogey or whatever, hey, everybody doing okay? Anything we can just, as simple as anybody got a prayer request, and the only thing you can't say is unspoken, because that's just not even, I mean... Yeah. You can say that, but not with your friends, not with your inner circle. If it's enough to talk about, just say what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal isn't eliminating fun, but it's making sure that you add in those eternal things. But I would just add a challenge. Somebody's got to be the initiator of depth.
Yep, somebody got to.
And so somebody's got to go first. And so if you're listening, it's you.
Yeah. Whoever the most spiritually mature, whoever loves Jesus the most in your group, they go
there
first.
It is. That's right.
Yeah, what a challenge, you know. You're listening, you're like, well, I guess it's me, I guess it's me. Right before we started recording, we were talking about Proverbs 18:1, which is the one, whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. he breaks out against all sound judgment. So want to dig into an idea that you actually said to us a few minutes ago wasn't necessarily a thing you were going to spend a lot of time on in your message, but people really grabbed onto it, which is that isolation versus solitude and understanding what the difference between those two things are. So how do we recognize when we're isolating ourselves spiritually? What are the red flags when that's happening?
Oh, I mean, we could probably make a list of 10. When you see the phone ring and it's one of your inner circle and you're just like, I don't even want to talk. I don't even want to talk to them. Not that you can't talk with them and not that you're busy. You just don't want to. And that's not all. I mean, I've done that before. But if you do that for a long time, that ends up it's just indicative of you're starting to really close out. Because if you're not, and especially if you don't call back or surfacey kind of stuff, all that is are red flags. But again, the difference being isolation is you are intentionally keeping people at arm's length, everybody at arm's length. There's tons of reasons about why we would do that, but solitude is different. Solitude is part of the rhythm, and that depends on who you are. I mean, if you're an introvert, you probably need a little more solitude, and so you can gauge it. But Jesus took solitude,
That's right.
And so that's the example. Solitude's not bad. That's just planned time where you're not on that. You're restoring, refreshing, whatever brings. I guess revival in a sense back to your heart.
Yeah.
But isolation is deliberately shutting people out, not letting people even know what's going on. And you can do that for a while, but at some point you're just going to end up very lonely.
Yeah. One of the things that fascinated me about that idea when you talked about it on Sunday was that our world tends to push us toward the opposite of both of those ends. So it pushes us to isolation, but it also provides so much noise that we can't get solitude.
I mean, think about if you were the enemy and you wanted to figure out how to make it where we don't have the relationships, you would invent something like this. Because what it does kind of has a double-edged sword. When you're with people, you're on this or you're looking at this, so you're not really with the people. Even how many times have you been in a restaurant and you look over and you see a couple who's maybe even like a young couple dating and they're still doing
On
it,
their
much
phones,
less, or you got a bunch, if you see a family of 4 and even the kid, everybody's on their phone in a restaurant.
Yeah.
So you're not really connecting there. And then when you try to get some solitude, and you have this, you can't even get solitude. So when you need to be locked in, it distracts you. When you need to be kind of locked out, it brings you back.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect, again, these are got a bunch of great stuff about it, but this is a perfect tool to keep you from biblical friendships.
Yeah, I think in that same vein, you are probably isolated if you consume spiritual content, but you don't have accountability. And so, because it's easy on there to even say, well, I'm good about the accounts that I follow, or I do this or I do that. But if it is knowledge-based and there's no accountability, or if what you're learning never transfers to you being able to encourage somebody else with it, then you're probably at an isolated space.
Yeah. So flip side of that question is, what are some of the healthy ways for believers to incorporate solitude into their lives without falling into the isolation trap?
Yeah, I mean, I think just rhythm. I mean, we've talked about it before. The Bible doesn't talk about it talks very much about working very hard. It talks about doing so in rhythm. And so your rhythms are going to look different, but you need one. And I would start off by saying a weekly Sabbath. A weekly time. Doesn't have to be solitude in the sense of you just go sit in a deer stand, although that's actually pretty restorative.
One of the best.
One of the best, yeah. But it can be a time you've got to let, I guess the old missionary said, it's time to let your soul catch up with your body. And so any kind of Sabbath, I would encourage, a little bit of an extended time in the Word and in prayer and just being quiet. It's very hard with all the noise to just be quiet. And we're scared of quiet. I'm scared of quiet because it's like, okay, I'd rather have activity than maybe if God's trying to tell me something difficult, something like that. So I think you have to be intentional about it because again, there is an unlimited amount of noise if you want it.
Yeah.
I mean, from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, you can have noise in your life.
And to go back to something you mentioned earlier, introversion, extroversion, it seems like it's less about, biblically, it's less about, hey, I'm going to prescribe you X amount of minutes or hours per day of solitude, and you need to feel this out intuitively based on your personality type?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, I'm not an expert in it. I would just say, and I've struggled with it back and forth. I mean, I love being around people, but when I'm done, I need to be good at it. It needs to like recharge versus some other people that are like, they just. But even they need like let's take Clayton. Clayton's like as high extrovert as you can ask, or that I've met. But even he knows it. There's got to be some solitude just to get centered again. That's another way to put it. Just get centered. Now he might not need as much as I do, and when he gets through in the lobby, he's probably all fired up as where I'm go take a nap. So, but everybody needs some just to let the Lord speak to you and be quiet.
Yeah, that's great. Proverbs 27:6, another one of those that was kind of built into the message a little bit. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, and that is loaded with meaning. But how do we've kind of circled this a little bit. How do we develop some of those friendships where truth is spoken in love?
Yeah. And again, I'm going to go back. I mean, and we use the word accountability. Most people think of accountability in a negative, like somebody's going to be, especially, I would just say, especially guys. They're like, I don't want anybody in my business. I don't want them seeing the real me. I don't want, what are they going to think of if this gets pulled back? All those things. But again, faithful, notice faithful is actually set against profuse. This is like a couplet. So the idea of the wounds, it's not explicit, but it is not. It doesn't say profuse are the wounds of a friend. It says faithful. So you can kind of read in there that these wounds, not like every time you meet your friend is going to like, Kristen, thank you for meeting with me, but I've got 10 things I see in your life that are jacked up, and it's every week. But they are there if they're faithful. And to Michelle's point a few minutes ago, it's kind of like saying, but they're the kind of people that they love you more than they love you loving them. And that's a big deal because, I mean, and especially if you are a person who is a leader in any organization, it takes a while to figure out, do they want to be close to me because I'm a leader? And they can either get something from that or feel or whatever that is. You've got to kind of watch that, and it takes some time, And I think you just watch and watch and watch. I think that's probably a little bit of what I mentioned. I learned. I forgot to mention it, I think, in the first service, but I don't know if they taught you, Michelle, on this thing. But I mean, I explicitly remember hearing from a couple of the profs, and it was well-meaning, but they would basically say that. You don't need to be friends with people you work that work for you, meaning that talking to a bunch of preachers like on staff. And then secondly, you don't need to be friends with people you're ministering to, meaning your church. Now, I know what I would say that's way too extreme. I think you got to be wise about it.
Sure.
And as we've said 100 times, authenticity bucket big, transparency bucket small. But that statement that they made very clearly goes against John 15. I mean, Jesus calls them friends.
That's right.
It's very explicit.
And he had Judas sitting there when he said it.
And
Peter, I mean, he had all those, they're sitting there, with them. I mean, heck, he washed Judas's feet knowing that this is what Judas was going to do. So all that being said, it is possible to have, I mean, some of my, number one, I would say the people on our staff, there's a lot of good friends. I know there's a little bit of a boss dynamic, but that's I think it's much more friendship. And then definitely we got people in the church. I mean, two of my closest friends are in our church. And again, I understand it. I know preachers are notorious for like, I don't want to get hurt, or I've been hurt, so I'm not going to get hurt again. And that's why you got a lot of angry preachers toward retirement. And they get angry and hurt and bitter and never deal with it. That's why it goes back to you got to give a lot of grace, even to your friends. Because the people who get idolized, like, oh, this is the best friend ever, and he's, she, what, they're going to let you down. I mean, they are. They're going to forget the text. They're going to say the wrong thing. They're going to step over the bound. They're going to do whatever. And that's like, man, if you don't have some grace toward your friends, then you're going to just not have. You're not going to have that. I mean, people don't want to be around somebody who's always hurt that you didn't do X, Y, and Z. See what I'm saying? It's like, why didn't you remember my birthday? Is that wrong to remember your friend's birthday? No, you probably should. I mean, that's what these are good for. But if you forget, they're not all jacked up about it. It's like, we're not really friends. It's not a most of the people like that are that I would call that's that code. You're starting to get you're idolizing somebody. You're depending on them to affirm you and all that. And I don't know if right or wrong. Those people don't. I mean, part of it's being. What kind of friend are you? I mean, we didn't really talk about it, but if you're the kind of friend that is demanding all the time, those tend to not have a lot of friends. So part of it's like, man, if you want a friend, just be a friend. Which part of that, most of that, showing a lot of grace toward our friends, because you are going to get nicked. I mean, it's like you're going to get nicked, and you make a case out of it every time. People are like, you know what, I don't need the drama.
Yeah. So, to that point, for the people who have been wounded in the past, what encouragement would y'all give for them to move forward? Because you still need close friends, even if you've been wounded. For
sure. I would see week 2, first of all, on grace / forgiveness. Yeah. Now, granted, if somebody is constantly hurting you, obviously that's not a friend. When I say hurting you, it's not that they're trying to help you course correct. I mean, they're just always the normal trajectory of, they're always taking, they're always criticizing. And if they're doing that, especially, they're not biblically the kind of friend you want. But I would say, and just get some new friends. I mean, get some folks. But again, that's where to me, the trust is really the oil of every relationship. Even like pastor to church, friend to friend. I mean, if you don't have trust in a relationship, husband and wife, once that's gone, you really don't have a very good foundation. And so part of that is trust. And, if I blow it with one of my friends, then what do? You go apologize. Man, please forgive me for that. But if you're doing that every day, then something's kind of wrong.
Yeah. Jesus was perfect truth, and he was perfect love. And if we're all honest, we're probably better at one than the other.
For sure.
And I think it's very important for you to know yourself and to know that if you lean love, then you might not never bring truth into those friendships. And if you can't be truthful in friendships, then that is a really insecure friendship. But if you're just a truth teller and you try to hide behind that, then you're probably going to come across like a Christian jerk. Isn't that your phrase?
Yeah, Jesus jerk. Jerk for Jesus. And, we got plenty of those already, and we don't need any more.
Those are not helpful. And so something that I've learned the hard way, I might be a truth teller, is learning that I'm not always right on my assessments.
See, that's a great point.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Well, no, it's just I want to speak. How many times I want to speak? This is my truth. No, it's not my truth. No. I mean, you put a qualifier, then you've just totally taken away the power of truth.
No,
and you can be wrong. Even seeing something, you might not have the whole story of what your friend's going through.
Yeah. So I try to add the phrase of, "Hey, listen, I might be misunderstanding. I might not have this right, but from my seat, I see some things that are concerning me a little bit. So either clear this up, tell me the rest, but if we need to talk, then let's dig a little deeper." But I try to add that disclaimer.
Well, and I would say, deputizing or giving people permission, which is, you don't give everybody permission, but if you're not getting it, you might want to ask. Like if you're getting to be good friends with somebody, it's like, hey, and go first. I want to just give you permission if you see something concerning.
So good.
But to Michelle's point about, most people are either grace or truth. Or I think you said love or truth. But you take John 1 where he's like, Jesus was full of grace and truth. Right. He was 100%. But to Michelle's point, we definitely, based on 100 different things, tend to lean one way or the other, either kind of grace people or truth people. And both of them have great strengths and some weaknesses. But
blind spots.
For a truth person, you got to watch that. Number one, you might not have it right. Everybody loves a prophet until they're talking to you, which you're like, okay, I'm not, I don't like that. But I think a lot of it is I've given people, there's a handful of people I've said, you have permission if you see something, which then makes it easy. So if I get upset, that's kind of on me because I asked them. And they kind of, and if people never give you feedback, you either haven't asked somebody for it, or when they did give you feedback, you got super defensive. And nobody who loves you wants to sit there and argue with you about something typically that's patently obvious. But one last thing, when it comes to friends, I would definitely select the time you wound them. I mean, just because you see something little, I would ask the question, is this a major deal?
Right.
Or is this a preference or a proclivity or something that I just kind of granted you could say, well, this is a step. And if he goes 3 more steps, that's different than just something that kind of bugs you. It's like, is this a critical issue? Yeah. If it's a critical issue, because most people are starved. They are starved for affirmation. They are starved for encouragement. And you can actually encourage somebody in a way that is recognition of something you're concerned about. but at the same time, and you're not flattering them. You're just saying, "Let's tell you what, I see you, but you're a very intentional father when you did this." And you did that, and that opens up a whole bunch of other questions you can ask. I mean, just how intentional you are. The fact that you read the scriptures with your kids, or you're teaching them how to do X, Y, and Z. Which that ends up. I mean, when's the last time when people affirm or encourage you about what they see God doing in you? Man, that almost like greases the skids.
Gasoline,
It is, but it also it provides a little safer spot, and it also provides a place where you're open to then when they're like, anything I can do better. Here's something that you might think about implementing. So that's
good.
Yeah, relational stuff is complicated. I mean, it's messy. It is. Even friendships can be complicated, but they're worth it.
Yeah. I'm thinking, just hearing you say that, I was thinking about in the last 10 years as a believer, I can immediately remember 2 major times when a friend came to me to confront me about something in love. And one time I received that, and the other time I got defensive. And years later, I still regret that defensive posture. And both of them were right. But I was just thinking about that, how easy it is to get defensive, even if you know that they care about you and they have your best interest. There's just something deep-seated. It's a pride thing, I guess, where you're just like, man, I don't want to be wrong here.
Or you go back, it's like, yeah, but I've seen this in your life. It's like, okay, all right.
That's not helpful.
Yeah, they're probably not coming back again.
Right.
Yeah. So want to kind of wrap it up this way. We've given a lot of very practical, great personal application steps. You had a bunch of them in your message. Want to make sure we drive home the point of how does a healthy church help people build those deep, meaningful relationships? Because obviously you can build deep friendships kind of on your own, and that's great. But how does the church play a role in that, or should it?
Well, I mean, golly, heck yeah, it should. Now, you can't make people be friends, but you can put them in contexts where it's going to happen. Obviously, the groups is a first step. Sometimes people are like, I try, and I do mean this, but if somebody's like, this is my 6th church in 6 years, or my 6th group in 6 years, and the other ones were jacked up. I'm just saying it could be, it's kind of like if somebody's like, man, it always stinks in here. It always stinks in here. It stinks in every room I go to. Well, maybe you got something on your shoe.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
Maybe, and maybe it's you. So I would say part of it is, if there's a pattern there, at least ask the question, man, is there something that I do to drive people away, or do I have too high of I think the common one is such a high expectation that they get devastated when somebody lets them down. And that goes into, you're starting to borderline get into idolatry, saying that person, when they let me down, my whole world falls apart. That's not a great spot to be in, because and that, it goes back to who you idolize, you will eventually demonize. That's why it's like, don't put me on a pedestal. All right. Don't put me on a pedestal, because if you put me on a pedestal, I promise you I'm going to let you down.
Right.
I had a lady at the widow's. Well, I don't know what to say. I had a lady at the widow's banquet. She's like, I just want to let you know I forgive you. I was like, okay, thank you for what?
What was that?
I was like, it's like, we came by your office and you weren't available. I was like, thank you for your forgiveness. But I was like, I don't even know you came. I mean, it's like, come on, all right. I don't even know if I was even there.
Yeah,
so
who knows, right?
yeah. So. I don't even know where that came from, but just showing a lot of grace toward, but particularly our friends even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to, here in the closing in a minute, we'll push people to some very simple action steps to join a group, things like that. But want to ask a very loaded question as we wrap up here. For people who just need to start developing community, they want to be jumping in, whether that's a group here or whatever. What should people be looking for and prioritizing, and what's less important? And I'll set it up this way. Michelle and I both deal in the group space here at our church, and we get a lot of requests that are very great. And then sometimes people reach out and they're like, hey, I'm looking for a group that is this very specific age bracket, and these couples are doing this specific thing, and it meets on this specific night, on this specific time, and and it starts to snowball where you're like, okay, maybe we need to do a better job of prioritizing what's most important. So what would you say are the most important things we need to be looking for when it comes to joining community?
Yeah, I mean, I think you don't know it till you're there sometimes. But I would say, most of ours are age-based, But the more we kind of go along and start more groups, there's a lot of health if, let's just say, you're in a group of people that are not your age. We have a ton of 20 and early 30s at our church. They need to rub shoulders with some people that are in their 50s and 60s that have done some stuff that actually, can speak wisdom into that. And so whether that be their leader, whether that be a mixed group, whatever that is. Let me before I forget, because a lot of times when we talk about faithful to the wounds of a friend, when people, I used to not ever take counsel. I used to never take counsel seriously unless I respected a person. And I'm like, I don't respect them. They don't live the life, blah, 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 blah. And just a sidebar note is when you get criticism from anybody, not just your friends, but anybody, from a friend is easier to take, for sure. It is easier to take. Right. But I would caution to say I'm not going to take, if somebody out there is as ignorant as I was, that I was like, I'm not taking counsel unless I respect them. If God can talk through a donkey, which he did, God can actually speak through a critic. And even what I've tried to learn is like, if somebody who I don't respect says something, it's like, is there any truth to what they said? Maybe there's only 10% truth. But again, God can speak through, if he can speak to the nation of Israel through a pagan nation like Babylon, then he can probably use somebody in your church who sees something that is not awesome. Like even the widow's banquet deal there. It's like, okay, at least think about it. All right. Do I need to make some changes where if somebody comes by, even if I'm in a meeting or, what do you need to do there? So my caution would be just, we were talking about, what's Proverbs 24, 25? It's like the back-to-back Proverbs. And one of them is like, do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be just like him. So somebody comes up, even if you consider them a fool. I know we're not supposed to call people fool, but the Bible does. So there obviously are foolish people. But don't answer him. But then the next verse or the previous verse says, do answer or answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. And we talked about, it's like that sounds like contradictory, but it's really complementary. It's like answer it once with compassion, clarity, conviction, but don't keep going back there or you then will also, you'll be just like the fool, just getting in there. So anyway, kind of a little tangent, but just the way you receive counsel, criticism. Nobody likes criticism. It's easier from a friend, but God can use it even if it's not a friend.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think I'll just reiterate things you said earlier. The church sets up structures where depth can happen. And so we meet on Sundays, but are you introducing yourself to the people that are sitting around you? Are you joining a reach team? Are you in a group? Are you those are things that matter. But then also just remembering that friendship takes time. And so if you want to develop deep relationships, it's not going to happen if you're expecting it to happen instantly.
Right.
And so I think priority number one is consistency and repetition, not wanting some unicorn experience. And so, I was thinking about like my two closest friends that are most likely to speak truth into my life. If you looked at us on paper and you didn't write down anything spiritual, it would be like, there's no shot these girls can be friends. Because on paper, we really have nothing in common. Like, I texted them this weekend because Tennessee had a pretty awesome buzzer beater win. And they were so happy for me, but they could care less. And at those two times, like,
am I one of those friends? Because I'm happy for you, but I could care less.
Tennessee won.
But have you watched it to the Celine Dion music yet? Because we can change your mind.
I have not. No.
But genuinely, like, do not look for the things that you think make sense. If you are spiritually hungry at the, an appropriate level, like together, like that is what makes a solid friendship.
Well, and that's a great point. We've all seen it where you feel closer to a fellow believer in Christ that you might not have anything from economic, educational, you don't have any of these common bonds, but you do have common bond in Jesus, and all of a sudden you're like super close. The age might even be different. And on the other hand, you might have tons of, on paper, you two ought to be friends because you like Tennessee, you like blah, 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 blah. But if you don't have that, commonality, then there's always, the biggest thing in your life is always going to be not there, not there with them. To answer your question, I would say in a nutshell, 3 quick ways is one of them groups for sure. Second would be serve, because if you serve with somebody, whether you're whatever, serving coffee, whether you're in the parking lot, whatever, you're shoulder to shoulder. And then a third way people don't think about sometime is a byproduct or a short-term mission trip. You get to know somebody. If you do like a 10-day mission trip and you go over to Dominican or Mali or wherever, that is like friendship concentrate. Because you have, whether it be plane rides or ministry, you're serving, you're in a group, it's kind of all of it wrapped into one.
True.
And then you have a shared experience, in a nutshell. That's why, you see the guys that are like go to war together. That is like, even not as believers, that would be like below that for sure, but they have gone through so much together that is lifelong bonds. And so, we talk about a mission trip, going over somewhere. There's people that I went on a mission trip with when I first got here, and that's what started a friendship. Then that was 16 years ago.
So good.
That's excellent. So heading into this Sunday, we're going into our 5th word of our 5 words to change your family. Anything you want to share? Preview for Sunday?
No.
I know you don't want to spoil it.
Set your clocks ahead.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
It's the bad one. Set them ahead.
It is the bad one.
They came up with this like to help people with 1 less hour sleep. Pop-Tarts. I'm gonna get out of keto just to be able to have a Pop-Tart. I'm gonna go for those blueberry bad boys, but they're gonna be everywhere. And also, even though we're not starting it this Sunday, there will be the next little series we'll be doing is out of the book of Judges, and the journals will be available this week as we started the following week. But no, this week is, again, all 5. They all complement each other. They're kind of in there on purpose. It's Wake Weekend as well. So you'll have a bunch of tired but happy students in all the services. So people keep those in your prayers for Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
So every week we like to close our podcast with a practice to make sure that we are actually putting this discussion to good use. So what's our practice?
Yeah, we want to make it really simple this week. We've been talking a lot about finding friends, building community, deepening your relationships. The simplest way we know how to do this is to give people the action step of join a group here at our church. We have so many groups, so many options. We want you to be in community, and there are 2 very easy ways to do this, right? Number 1, you can text group to 28282, just like any other action step we have.
That's right.
You can text to 28282, and if you do that, it's going to pull up a list of all of our groups. You can go through, find one that works for you. Just try one out, right? You don't have to sign in blood.
Right.
Just give it a shot, try it out. And then secondly, maybe it's like, hey, I think I want to host a group. I work at this place and I have these coworkers I'd love to journey through this deal with. We have a great starter kit for you. You can host a group. So if you want to do that, you can text HOST to 28282. Our desire is just we want you to find community.
Right. And if you're a student and you are listening to this, or you're a parent of a student, Wake Weekend is such an incredible time to come, jump in. It kind of like acts like a mission trip that Pastor talked about earlier, about how you get that concentrated relational time. This is your time to come in, to make those friends that can give you the encouragement that you need to go live missionally in your schools, your sports, your extracurricular activities, to live with purpose.
Sign up. It's not too late.
Thank you so much for listening today. We pray that this helps you to follow Jesus and to grow in your walk with him. So we will be back next Wednesday with another episode to continue this conversation that will equip you and just encourage you as you continue taking steps. And so we are excited to be back with you. Hope to see you on Sunday. Don't forget, like Pastor said, remember that it is the time change. So we're going to soften the blow with some Pop-Tarts. So as always, you are loved and sent.